What do you do when your wife sits in your living room with her friends, calmly announces they've decided to divorce you, and you answer with one question that makes their smirks vanish, because it hints she's been sleeping with their husbands too? My name is Daniel Mercer, and I have learned the hard way that a living room can become a courtroom without a judge, a jury, or even the courtesy of warning. It happened on a Tuesday that looked harmless from the outside, the kind of evening where the streetlights blink on like tired eyes and the neighbors keep their curtains half closed out of habit rather than fear. I came home to a house that smelled like citrus cleaner and perfume layered over it, as if someone had tried to disinfect the air after a bad decision, and I knew before I saw anyone that I was not walking into dinner, peace, or anything I would recognize as my own life. The voices carried first, soft laughter, with that practiced brightness people use when they want to seem relaxed while doing something cruel. Then I saw them, arranged in my living room, like they had staged themselves for a photo I was not invited to stand in. 3 women perched on my couch and the love seat, legs crossed, glasses in hand, the kind of casual posture that says we belong here, even if we don't. My wife, Lauren, sat in the center like she was the host of an evening talk show, chin raised, shoulders back, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. To her left was Kendra, who always wore expensive neutrals and talked about boundaries like she invented them. To her right was Melissa, whose laugh was too loud and whose gaze never held still, as if she was always scanning for exits. The third, Dana, lounged near the armrest like a cat that had already decided the furniture was hers. They watched me step inside as if I was the late guest who had ruined the timing of a toast, and for a second I had the strange thought that I should apologize for walking into my own house. Lauren's eyes flicked down to my hands, then up to my face, the quick inventory that said she was checking whether I had brought a weapon, a surprise, or maybe just desperation. I had brought none of those, only a tired body and the sort of quiet that happens when you have learned that raising your voice never makes you less wrong in other people's stories. I set my keys on the entry table with deliberate care, because I have always believed that small sounds can announce a mood better than words. The metal tapped the wood once, clean and sharp, and the room went still for the briefest moment, like they were all waiting for the opening line in a play. Lauren did not waste time. She turned slightly, not fully toward me, and that small angle was the first insult. She was speaking to the room, not to me, because she wanted witnesses, because she wanted a chorus. "We've decided it's time to divorce you," she said, and the words were delivered like a verdict that had already been signed, stamped, and filed. The smirks came right on cue, like they had rehearsed them in the kitchen while pouring the wine. Kendra's mouth tightened with satisfaction. Melissa looked relieved, as if being present made her brave by association. Dana's eyes glittered with that hungry curiosity people get when they think they are about to watch someone break. I stood there in the doorway between the hall and the living room, taking in the scene the way a man takes in an accident he can't stop. The spacing of bodies, the posture, the glassware, the way Lauren's phone sat face down on the coffee table like a secret that had learned manners. I noticed the throw blanket folded too neatly, the little coaster under Lauren's drink, the faint smear of lipstick on the rim of Dana's glass. Details are comforting when the big picture is absurd. Lauren's face did not move much, but her eyes did, and in them I saw her expectation. She wanted me loud. She wanted me panicked. She wanted me pleading or threatening, something she could label, something she could narrate later over brunch. If I gave her that, she would walk away with my dignity folded in her purse like a receipt. I let the silence stretch, because silence makes people nervous when they are trying to control a room, and I watched their confidence wobble just slightly. My heart was steady, not because I felt safe, but because I felt something sharper than fear, something clinical. When you have been married long enough, you learn the difference between being surprised and finally having your suspicions sit down in a chair and introduce themselves. I stepped farther into the room and stopped beside the bookshelf, keeping the coffee table between me and them, not like I feared them physically, but because distance gives you perspective. Lauren's mouth opened as if to continue, to add a speech she had prepared, maybe something about irreconcilable differences, personal growth, how I had changed, the usual arsenal of phrases people use when they want to sound like they tried. I did not let her. I looked at the three women who were not my wife, the ones who had come into my home to watch a show, and I asked the only question that mattered. So none of you care she's been seeing your husbands? The words landed heavy, not because I raised my voice, but because I did not. I said it plainly, like I was asking whether anyone wanted coffee, and in that calmness, there was something they could not rehearse against. The smirks died in stages. Dana's went first, blinking out like a screen losing power. Kendra's expression tried to hold, because women like Kendra treat disbelief as a personal brand, but her eyes gave her away, widening with the reflex of someone hearing their name in a room they thought was private. Melissa's face drained so quickly it looked theatrical, and her hand tightened around her glass as if it was the only solid thing left. Lauren's smile did not vanish immediately, which told me she had not expected me to go there, but she recovered fast, as she always did. Her eyes sharpened, her chin lifted another fraction, and she gave a short laugh that sounded like a coin bouncing on tile. "That is pathetic," she said, and the tone was warm and scolding, like she was correcting a child who had said something embarrassing in public. "You always do this, Daniel. You always try to twist things when you're cornered." Kendra swallowed, and I saw the movement in her throat, like a confession. Dana stared at Lauren as if she was waiting for her to deny it more convincingly. Melissa looked at her phone, then put it down again, like she was fighting an impulse to call someone and terrified of what she would hear if she did. I had the sudden, quiet satisfaction of a man turning on a light in a room full of roaches. Lauren leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped as if she was about to deliver compassion. "We're not doing this," she said, and she swept her gaze across her friends as if to anchor them to her version of reality. "This is between me and him, and he is trying to poison it because he can't handle the truth." The truth, in Lauren's mouth, was always flexible. It bent around what she wanted, and it snapped back only when someone else tried to hold it still. I took a slow breath, and I let my eyes move from one face to the next. "You didn't come here for a private conversation," I said, keeping my voice even. "You came here with an audience. So let's not pretend this is about respect." Dana shifted, her knee bouncing once before she forced it still. Kendra's cheeks reddened, but she fought it, lifting her chin the way people do when they are trying to look above a mess they are standing in. Melissa's fingers trembled slightly as she set her glass down, and that tremor told me more than any words could. People can lie with their mouths, but their bodies are terrible actors. Lauren's eyes flashed, and for an instant I saw the real emotion behind her practiced control. It was not guilt. It was irritation, like I had refused to play my assigned role. "You're making accusations," she said, and her voice had that special emphasis on the word, as if the concept of evidence was beneath her. "You have nothing." I almost smiled, because that was the first time in months she had said something honest without meaning to. I had nothing, not yet, not in the neat package that would survive a conversation with a lawyer, but I had patterns. I had late nights that did not line up with the calendar she shared. I had small expenses that landed in our joint account like pebbles in a shoe. I had the way she started locking her phone when she never used to, like she was protecting it from me rather than from the world. I had the new perfume that didn't belong to her, the one she claimed was a sample from a coworker. I had the fresh energy she brought home after certain girls' nights, the kind that comes from adrenaline, not relaxation. And now I had this, The way 3 women had come into my living room to declare my marriage over as a group decision, like they were dissolving a club membership. Kendra finally found her voice, thin and sharp. "This is insane," she said, and the sentence was aimed at me, but her eyes flicked to Lauren like she was asking permission to believe her. Lauren would never do that. Dana's laugh was a single, nervous sound. "Yeah," she added, too quickly. That's ridiculous." Melissa did not speak, which made her the most honest person in the room. I looked at Lauren again, and I let my eyes rest on her hands, the manicure perfect, the ring still on her finger. "You're right," I said softly. "Accusations aren't useful. Questions are." Lauren's lips pressed together. "What are you doing?" she asked, and this time the warmth slipped, and there was a crack of something like fear. "I'm letting everyone catch up," I said. "Because you didn't just walk into this house today and decide to divorce me. You planned it. You recruited an audience. You brought 3 wives into my living room and expected me to sit quietly while you made me the villain." Dana's eyes darted, and for a second I thought she might stand, might leave, might salvage whatever dignity she had left, but she stayed seated because curiosity is stronger than self-respect in people like her. Kendra set her glass down too hard, and the ice clinked like a warning. "Lauren," she said, and that single word carried a question she didn't want to ask out loud. Lauren smiled again, but it was brittle now. "Don't," she said, not to me, but to Kendra, and that was when I knew I had hit the exact nerve I wanted. Control is Lauren's addiction, and she hates withdrawal more than she hates consequences. Melissa finally spoke, and her voice was small. "Lauren," she said, staring at the carpet as if the fibers might give her an answer. "Is there something we should know?" Lauren's eyes cut toward her, and the look was sharp enough to draw blood if looks could. "You know him?" Lauren said, gesturing toward me as if I was an object. "He's manipulative. He's bitter. He's trying to get in your heads." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I let her words hang in the air because they sounded flimsy now, like paper held too close to flame. I took my phone from my pocket and held it loosely at my side without looking at it, because I did not need it yet. "You came here to tell me you've decided," I said. "So here's what I'm deciding. Nobody leaves this room thinking they watched a clean ending. If you want to end my marriage in public, then you can't complain when the truth gets stage time too." Lauren stood up fast, and her movement was the first real break in her composed performance. "This is my house too," she snapped, and the words were meant to claim territory, to remind everyone that she had rights, that she had standing, that she could still command the room. I nodded once, slow. "Then act like it," I said. "Act like a wife who has nothing to hide." The silence that followed was not empty. It was packed tight with suspicion, with memories being replayed in other people's heads, with the sudden mental math of dates and late nights and small lies. I watched it happen on their faces like weather rolling in, and I understood something in that moment with cold clarity. Lauren had not just betrayed me. She had treated betrayal like a group hobby, like a game that required cheerleaders, and she had trusted that I was too polite, too tired, or too afraid to flip the table. She was wrong. And as I stood there in the living room, with 3 wives staring at my wife like she had turned into a stranger, I felt my phone vibrate once in my palm, then again, and I knew that whatever Lauren had been doing in the shadows, she had just realized the lights were coming on. Lauren's face held that brittle smile for another second, but her eyes started doing what her mouth refused to do, which was admit that she had lost control of the room, because control only works when everyone agrees to pretend it is natural. Kendra looked like she wanted to snap the air in half with a question, Dana looked like she wanted to vanish into the cushions, and Melissa kept staring at the carpet as if the pattern might tell her which lie she had been living in. I stood there, with my phone vibrating in my hand, not because I needed the screen, but because the vibration gave me a simple, physical reminder that consequences were real and already moving. Lauren stepped toward me, slow enough to look measured, fast enough to feel like a threat, and she lowered her voice the way people do when they want privacy while still performing. She told me I was embarrassing myself, then told me I was embarrassing her, then told me I was embarrassing everyone, as if embarrassment was the crime and betrayal was just a hobby with bad optics. I did not answer her in the tone she wanted, because there is a specific rhythm to an argument Lauren wins, and it always begins with me trying to prove I am not the monster she describes. I refused to step onto that stage, and I watched her frustration sharpen into something that looked almost like panic, because panic is what happens when a liar realizes their audience is starting to ask for receipts. Kendra finally stood, smoothing her shirt like she was smoothing her pride, and she said she needed to go, but her voice was weak and uncertain, and the sentence ended like a question she did not want answered. Dana rose after her, and Dana's eyes flicked toward Lauren with a look that was not loyalty, but calculation, because Dana had the survival instincts of someone who always wants to be near power, until power starts smoking. Melissa stayed seated for one more heartbeat, then stood too, and when she glanced at Lauren, there was pain there, the raw, confused kind, because Melissa was the only one in the room who looked like she had truly believed in friendship rather than convenience. Lauren tried to block them with a laugh and a hand gesture, as if she could wave them back into denial, but Kendra sidestepped her, and Dana followed, and Melissa walked last, moving carefully, like the floor had become thin ice. In the hallway, there was a brief tangle of purses and apologies, and then Kendra's phone rang, and she froze as if a hook had caught the inside of her ribs. She stared at the screen, and her face tightened, and she declined the call without looking at any of us. That tiny action, that reflex, told me more than any confession would have, because people only decline like that when they already know who is calling, and they already know what it means. They left in a stagger, not together, which mattered, because solidarity was what Lauren had purchased for tonight, and now the product was malfunctioning. I heard the front door open, then close, then the street sound rush in and fade out again, and the house felt suddenly bigger, emptier, like the walls had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. Lauren stood in the living room, shoulders squared, eyes bright with anger, and she looked at me like I had taken something from her, which was hilarious in the way a mugger thinks you are rude for not handing over your wallet politely. "What did you do?" she said, and it was not a question, it was an accusation built like a knife. "I asked a question," I said, because I refused to give her drama when she had demanded it. "You're lying," she snapped, then softened, then snapped again, shifting gears the way she always did when she was trying to find the setting that would make me behave. She told me I was paranoid, then told me I was insecure, then told me I was cruel, and every word was less about truth and more about pulling me back into the old choreography where she leads, and I stumble. I walked past her toward the kitchen, not running away, just refusing the spotlight, and I heard her follow me with quick steps, her voice getting louder as if volume could replace evidence. In the kitchen, the counter was littered with wine glasses, a half-empty cheese board, and a stack of napkins that looked untouched, which meant the night had been more about performance than appetite. Lauren leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and she watched me like she was waiting for me to break, because she still thought that if she waited long enough, I would become the version of me she had already described to her friends. I opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water, not because I was thirsty, but because I wanted my hands busy. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, and this time I took it out and looked. And I saw a string of missed calls from unknown numbers and one message from a contact saved as Evan, which I recognized immediately as the name of Lauren's ex, because she had said it enough times over the years, with that casual, nostalgic tone that always made the name sound harmless. The message was short, jagged, and furious, and even without seeing his face, I could feel the heat coming off it through the screen. Lauren's breath hitched, and she saw the change in my eyes, and she knew I had seen something that did not fit her planned narrative. "Give me that," she said, stepping forward, reaching for my phone like it was hers by right. I moved it away without drama, and that small motion sent her over the edge, because entitlement hates boundaries more than it hates betrayal. She told me I was invading her privacy, and the hypocrisy was so clean and automatic that I almost admired it, like watching a professional pickpocket lecture you about theft. "You brought them here to announce a divorce," I said, still calm, still steady. "You don't get to lecture me about privacy in my own kitchen." Lauren's eyes flashed, and she tried a different angle, the wounded angle, the one that makes people feel guilty for holding a mirror. She said she had been unhappy for years, she said I had been absent, she said she had been lonely, and she said all of it like she was reading from a script that had been polished by repetition. The problem with rehearsed pain is that it sounds too smooth, and her words slid off the counter like water, leaving nothing behind. I set the water bottle down and looked at her the way I would look at a stranger trying to sell me something overpriced. "You didn't just decide to divorce me," I said. "You decided to humiliate me." "That's ridiculous," she said too fast, and her voice cracked on the last syllable. I nodded once, slow. "Then explain why you invited 3 wives into my living room to watch." Lauren's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, and for a second I thought she might actually tell the truth, not because she wanted to, but because she was running out of safe lies. Instead, she did what she always did when cornered, which was attack the framing. She said those women were her support system. She said she was scared of how I would react. She said she needed witnesses to protect herself, and she delivered the line with enough conviction that it might have worked on someone who had not lived beside her for years. The moment she said it, I understood the deeper game, because that wasn't just a lie for tonight, it was a foundation for later. She wasn't only trying to end a marriage, she was trying to pre-build a story where I was dangerous, and she was brave. That story would be useful in mediation, useful in custody conversations if those ever became real, useful with friends, useful at work, useful anywhere she wanted sympathy without accountability. I did not raise my voice, because raising your voice is how you donate credibility to someone else's fiction. Instead, I reached for my wallet on the counter and pulled out a small notebook I kept tucked behind old receipts, the kind of thing I had started carrying months ago without admitting to myself why. Lauren watched me with narrowed eyes, and her posture shifted because she recognized the energy of documentation, and documentation is the one thing a storyteller cannot outtalk. "What is that?" she demanded, but the edge in her voice was thinner now. "Nothing," I said, "just me keeping my memory honest." That was enough to make her step closer, to try to see, to try to control what I had and what I thought I had, and as she moved, her phone slid slightly on the counter, face up now, because her hand had bumped it. The screen lit with a notification, bright and casual, the kind of thing that appears and disappears in a second, except it didn't disappear fast enough for me to miss it. A banner from a rideshare app popped up with a charge and a pickup location, and the location was not our neighborhood, not even close, and the timing was late, far too late for anything she had described as harmless. Lauren snatched the phone so quickly it looked like reflex, and she pressed it against her chest like it was a wound. Her eyes widened, just a fraction, and that fraction was the first real crack I had seen in her armor tonight. "Work," she said automatically, and the word came out before she even thought about it. I tilted my head slightly. "At this hour?" I asked, soft enough to be polite. She stared at me, and in that stare I saw her mind racing, flipping through cover stories like cards. Therapy appointment, late shift swap, helping a friend, committee crisis, the classics. She chose one and said she had been helping Melissa with something personal, and the lie would have been almost believable if Melissa hadn't just walked out of my house with a face full of dread. I didn't argue, And that was what made her nervous, because Lauren thrives on fighting, on noise, on emotional fog. Quiet is a spotlight, and she hates being seen clearly. I took my phone again and scrolled, slow and deliberate, and I opened Evan's message, not to provoke her, but to confirm the temperature of the situation. It wasn't a confession, but it was sharp enough to be useful later. He demanded to know what I had told his wife. He demanded to know why she was calling him, and he used the word guessed in a way that made it clear he understood exactly what the implication was. He wasn't angry because I had lied. He was angry because I had threatened his domestic peace. Lauren saw the screen, and her face turned hard. "You contacted her," she said, and now the accusation had a new flavor, not moral outrage, but fear of exposure. "I asked if she knew," I said. "That's not a crime." Lauren's laugh was brittle again, and she told me I was trying to ruin people's lives, which was rich coming from the woman who had just tried to ruin mine as a group activity. She said if I kept going, she would tell everyone I was controlling. She would tell everyone I was unstable. She would tell everyone I was harassing her friends. She said it like she was listing tools in a box, and that was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a marriage argument and started thinking of it as an adversarial process where the person who controls the story wins. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the counter, making sure my posture looked calm and boring, because boring is safe and safe is credible. "You can tell any story you want," I said, "but stories collapse when dates don't match." Lauren flinched, and it was small, but it was real. I walked past her toward the living room, not to retreat, but to see what she had left behind. The couch cushions still held their shape, and one of the throw pillows had a faint smear of foundation on it that wasn't Lauren's shade. On the coffee table, there was a napkin folded in half with a lipstick mark, and beside it, a small key fob, the kind you get from a gym locker or a community pool gate. Lauren noticed my gaze, and she moved fast, scooping it up, but she was a second too late because I had already seen the logo printed on it, a stylized letter I recognized from the fitness club a few miles away, the one she had claimed she stopped going to because she didn't like the vibe. "What is that?" I asked, still calm, still even. "It's nothing," she said instantly, and the speed of her answer made it a confession. I nodded once, as if I accepted it, and that made her eyes narrow, because she didn't understand the strategy yet. I wasn't going to win by forcing a confession tonight, because confessions are slippery and easy to deny later. I was going to win the way I always had when I needed truth, by collecting small, solid points that could not be argued with, and by letting other people draw the conclusions themselves. Lauren stepped closer again, and her voice dropped into a cold, controlled tone. "You think you're clever?" she said. "You think you can trap me?" I looked at her, and I let the sarcasm in my mind stay in my mind because I wasn't performing for her anymore. "No," I said. "I think you trapped yourself when you brought witnesses." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't over," she said. I met her eyes. "I know," I answered, and I meant it. My phone vibrated again, and this time it was a message from an unknown number with one sentence that made my stomach go cold, not with fear, but with clarity. It said that if I wanted to keep this quiet, I needed to stop calling people, and it ended with a detail about my schedule that I had not told anyone in that room. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked up at Lauren, and I realized the divorce ambush had been the surface play, but the real game had already started somewhere deeper, with someone who thought they could control me with information. And I understood, in that quiet, awful second, that Lauren wasn't just cheating, she was coordinated. By morning, the house felt like it had been scrubbed with bleach, because Lauren had that talent for turning a mess into a stage again, and the stage into a weapon, and then acting offended when someone noticed the props. The wine glasses were gone, the napkins were gone, the sofa cushions were flipped and fluffed, and the air smelled faintly like citrus cleaner and determination. She moved through rooms with brisk, efficient motions, not making eye contact, not speaking first, as if silence itself could rewrite the last 12 hours into something less damning. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee I did not taste, and I watched her from the corner of my eye, because direct staring would have fed her a sense of importance, and I was done feeding her anything. When you live with someone long enough, you learn their two languages, the one they speak and the one they perform, and Lauren was performing now, not for me, but for whatever audience she expected to arrive soon. She had already built the story where I was irrational, jealous, and controlling, and she was now arranging the set, so the story looked plausible if anyone stepped inside. My phone lay face down beside my mug, but my mind kept replaying that message from the unknown number, the one that mentioned my schedule like it was public property. It had not threatened me with violence, it had threatened me with narrative, which was worse in a marriage where narrative was the only courtroom that mattered. Someone had information, or at least the confidence to claim they did, and confidence alone can ruin you if people decide to believe it. Lauren finally spoke, not to address the message, not to apologize, not to clarify anything, but to make a declaration that sounded like a verdict. She said she was taking the day off, she said she had appointments, and she said she did not want a scene if she came back late. She delivered it flat, like a landlord listing rules, and then she poured herself water and drank it as if she had just been the reasonable one. I asked, lightly, where she would be, and she gave me a look that tried to make curiosity look abusive. She said she did not owe me details anymore, and then she added that she had told people I had been acting unstable, the way you add a small poison pill to a conversation and then pretend you did not. She wanted me to react, to raise my voice, to give her a clean clip she could replay for friends and family later, and I let the moment pass like a car I did not need to chase. When she left, she did it with the kind of careful slowness that implies she is expecting to be stopped, and when I did not stop her, I saw irritation flicker under her mask. The door clicked shut, and I waited until I heard her car pull away before I stood up, because I was not going to be the man who snoops wildly and then panics at his own reflection. I was going to be methodical, boring, and precise, because boring is what survives in the long run. The living room still looked too tidy, but the tidiness itself was information, because it told me she was hiding not just evidence, but the fact that evidence had ever existed. I walked the space slowly, as if I were a property inspector, and I reminded myself of the things I had already seen, the gym key fob, the rideshare charge, the way Kendra had declined that call without looking up, the way Melissa had looked like she had swallowed glass. If Lauren's friends had come in to divorce me like a pack and then fled like scattered birds, it meant something had already started breaking behind the scenes. I began with what I could verify without guessing. I opened the shared account app on my phone, the one we both used for household bills, and I scrolled through the last month of charges, not hunting for some dramatic smoking gun, but looking for patterns, because patterns do not care what you believe. There were small charges that made sense, groceries, gas, pharmacy receipts, and then there were charges that were too consistent to be accidental, 2 late-night rideshare pickups in the same area across 2 different weeks, each one followed by a small charge at a cafe near that location, each one at an hour where Lauren had claimed she was either asleep or at Melissa's. It was not proof of sex, and I did not need proof of sex, because sex is a detail people argue about, while logistics is something even liars struggle to bend. I took screenshots, not out of rage, but out of habit, and I saved them in a folder with a bland name that would not tempt my own emotions later. I wrote down dates and times on paper as well, because paper has a seriousness that phones sometimes lack, and because if this turned into a civil process, I wanted a timeline I could defend without relying on memory. Then I did something that felt almost childish, but it mattered, because small details often hold the hinge of a bigger door. I walked to the entryway closet and checked the shoe rack, because I had seen lipstick on a napkin and foundation on a pillow, and that meant someone had been here whose body had left a trace. Most of the shoes were ours, familiar, boring, but one pair of slim heels sat pushed deeper into the corner, half hidden behind a tote bag. They were not Lauren's size, and they were not Lauren's style, and they had a scuff on the right heel that looked fresh. I did not touch them with drama. I just took a photo of them next to the day's newspaper on my phone screen, because time-stamped context prevents later arguments about when you noticed something. I closed the closet and stood there for a long moment, feeling the strange calm that arrives when suspicion becomes documentation. It was not satisfying, because satisfaction is for stories, and real life is mostly paperwork and nausea, but it was stabilizing. Lauren could call me unstable all she wanted, but unstable men do not build neat evidence ledgers. Around noon, my phone rang again from an unknown number, and this time I answered, not because I wanted confrontation, but because I wanted the shape of the voice. A man spoke quickly, with forced calm, and he said my name as if it tasted unpleasant. He told me to stop contacting people, he told me I was making things worse, and he told me that private matters should stay private. I asked who he was, and he hesitated half a beat before saying Evan, which meant Lauren's ex had either found courage or been pushed into it. I did not threaten him, and I did not beg, because neither moves a man like Evan. I asked, in a neutral tone, why he believed he had the right to instruct me about my marriage. He said Lauren had told him I was harassing his wife, and then his voice tightened, because even he could hear how ridiculous that sounded once he said it aloud. I asked him if his wife knew Lauren had been in his house, and he snapped that Lauren had not been in his house. She had been there with friends, and he said it too fast, the way you say something you have practiced. That was my first clear confirmation that the story they were pushing had a shape, and the shape was designed to make Lauren's choices look social rather than intimate. I asked him one question, very calmly, about the rideshare pickups and the cafe charges, because I wanted to see if he would deny something he could not control. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale, and then he said he did not know what I was talking about, which was not a denial. It was a dodge. The call ended with him warning me again, and when the line went dead, I stared at my phone and realized he was not calling to protect Lauren. He was calling to protect himself from the implosion of his own home. I did not call anyone back immediately, because I was not going to become the loud man in their story. Instead, I opened my notes and wrote down the details of the call, the time, the tone, the fact that he avoided specifics, the fact that he used the phrase, private matters, like it was an incantation. People who are innocent do not speak like that, because innocence does not require a slogan. By late afternoon, Lauren still had not returned, and the quiet in the house had become its own pressure, heavy and deliberate. I forced myself to do normal things, wash a few dishes, take out the trash, answer a work email, because if I turned this into an obsession in one day, I would be helping her narrative. Then, just before 6, my doorbell camera sent a motion alert, and I saw Lauren's face on the screen, but she was not alone. A man stood half a step behind her, outside the frame at first, then shifting so his shoulders came into view. He was tall, wearing a neutral jacket, and he carried himself like someone who expected to be welcomed because he had been welcomed before. Lauren stepped forward and knocked, and she smiled at the camera, which was the creepiest part, because it meant she knew the camera existed, and she did not care. She wanted a record too, but she wanted a record that showed her composed and me unpredictable. When I opened the door, I kept my posture loose and my voice even, because I could feel the trap before it closed. She introduced the man as a mediator, which was a lie dressed as a courtesy, and she said he was here to help us talk. The man offered his hand like he was a professional, but his eyes moved quickly around the entryway, taking inventory, the way a recruiter does when they walk into a workplace. I did not shake his hand, not rudely, just with a small smile and a simple refusal, and the refusal made Lauren's smile tighten, because she wanted the optics of cooperation. I asked the man for his card, and he handed one over, and I glanced at it and saw it was not a mediation service at all. It was a private counseling practice, the kind that thrives on being vague. The last name printed there was Grayson, and I repeated it aloud once, not as a threat, but as a confirmation. Lauren's jaw tensed because she did not like her little helpers being named. Grayson said he could help us navigate separation, and I told him politely that I had not agreed to any session, and I did not consent to a surprise professional visit at my home. Lauren started talking over me immediately, saying I was being difficult, saying I was refusing help, saying I was proving her point, and I watched her perform the exact scene she had wanted. The difference was that I was not playing the role. I stepped onto the porch, keeping the door partially closed behind me, controlling the space like a boundary rather than a battleground. I told Grayson that if Lauren wanted to discuss separation, she could schedule an appointment properly, and I would attend with my own counsel present. Lauren's eyes flashed at the word counsel because she wanted to be the only one in the room with allies. Grayson tried to soothe the moment, saying we should not escalate, and I agreed, which surprised him because men like him expect resistance, not agreement. I said we would not escalate at the door, and then I asked Lauren, calmly, why she needed witnesses to divorce me twice, first her friends, now a professional. The question landed like a weight because it forced her to admit the pattern out loud or to dodge in front of someone who was supposed to be neutral. Lauren's smile slipped for 1 second, and then she recovered, saying she feared my reactions. I nodded slowly, as if I accepted her claim, and then I gestured lightly toward the doorbell camera and asked, still calm, if she wanted to state that fear on the record, right there, with the camera watching, with Grayson standing as a witness. She froze, because she did not want a record she could not edit later. Grayson cleared his throat, uncomfortable now, because he had stepped into something he did not understand. Lauren's eyes burned with quiet fury, and she hissed my name like it was an insult. She told Grayson we should leave, and she spun away from the door, marching down the steps with the stiff posture of a woman who refuses to look defeated. Grayson followed, but before he reached the sidewalk he glanced back at me once, and in that glance I saw something that made my stomach tighten again, not with fear, but with recognition. He was not confused, he was measuring, like he was checking whether I was easy to push, whether I would explode, whether Lauren's story about me would pay off. As they reached the car, Lauren's phone lit again in her hand, and I saw her thumb move fast, texting someone before she got in. The car pulled away, and the street went quiet, and I stood in my doorway for a long moment, listening to the echo of their performance fade. Inside, my phone buzzed with a new message, and when I opened it, I saw a photo attached, grainy and cropped, showing me on the porch with Lauren and Grayson. The message underneath read that I should stop making this ugly because people were watching, and then it added, almost casually, that if I cared about my reputation, I should choose silence. I stared at the screen and felt the last piece click into place, because now I knew the unknown number was not just Evan, and it was not just one angry spouse. It was a network of people trying to keep their marriages intact by sacrificing mine. And if Lauren had been seeing their husbands, then the wives were not just witnesses, they were accomplices. I set my phone down, opened my notebook again, and wrote one clean line at the top of a new page, because the story was no longer about whether Lauren was cheating. The story was about how many people were invested in me staying quiet. And I was done being quiet. By the time the sun slid behind the neighboring roofs, my house had stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a file, the kind you keep on someone when you expect them to lie, because a file does not care about feelings and it never forgets what you wrote down. I cleaned nothing, I moved nothing, and I refused the urge to pace, because pacing is what guilty people do when they are waiting for consequences, and I was done acting like I was the one who should be nervous. Instead, I laid out my notes on the kitchen table the way an honest man lays out receipts when he wants the argument to end, dates and times on paper, Screenshots saved under a name so boring it could pass for a grocery list, and one photo of those unfamiliar heels in the closet, sitting there like a confession that could not speak. I checked the doorbell camera clips from earlier and saved the still frame where Lauren's smile looked fixed, the kind of smile you use when you want the recording to favor you, and I saved the frame where Grayson's eyes were scanning my entryway like he was counting exits. I did not need to invent malice in that moment. The body does not lie as well as the mouth, and his body said he had rehearsed this kind of doorstep theater before. Then I opened the message with the grainy porch photo again, not because I enjoyed being watched, but because I wanted to notice what I missed the first time: the angle, the distance, the height of the lens. Whoever took it was not standing on my sidewalk, which meant the photo came from inside a parked car, or from across the street behind tinted glass, or from a balcony with a clear line of sight, and that meant this was not random gossip, it was coordinated. My phone buzzed again, a call this time, and the number was still blocked, which was cute, like a child hiding behind a curtain while his feet stick out. I answered anyway and held the phone away from my ear for a second, because I did not trust myself not to flinch, and a flinch is a kind of permission. A woman spoke first, her voice tight and controlled, and she said my name like she had practiced it in front of a mirror, not to pronounce it correctly, but to make it sound like an accusation. She told me I had crossed a line, and she told me to stop talking to people, and she told me that Lauren was going through something, as if my marriage was a community project, and I was the only one refusing to share. I asked who she was, and she refused, which told me everything, because refusal is what people do when they want authority without accountability. I asked what line I crossed, and she said I had threatened to tell wives, and she said it in the plural, which was a gift she did not realize she had handed me. I let a beat of silence hang, because silence makes liars talk, and then I asked calmly if she meant the wives whose husbands were apparently innocent men blindsided by Lauren's presence, or the wives who had sat in my living room the night before and smirked while they tried to turn divorce into a party trick. She inhaled sharply, the way you do when a man refuses to play dumb, and then she said Lauren had made mistakes, but that I did not have the right to destroy families. That line hit me like a laugh in a funeral, because they were asking me to protect the families they had already set on fire, and they wanted me to do it quietly so they could pretend the smoke was weather. I told her in the same calm voice that I was not destroying anything, I was observing it, and that families destroyed by truth were already rotten enough to fall. She snapped that I was unstable, she used that word again, and then she warned me that people could make things hard if I insisted on humiliating Lauren publicly, which was rich, coming from someone who had literally attended a humiliation session in my home. I did not threaten her back, because threats are for people who lack leverage, and I had leverage now, even if it was just a growing stack of documented inconsistencies. I told her one simple thing, that I was keeping records of every call and message, and that any further contact could be shared with counsel if it escalated. The line went dead after that, because the fastest way to end a bully's courage is to treat their behavior like evidence instead of drama. I wrote down the time of the call, the exact wording about wives, and the warning about making things hard, and I underlined the plural again, because it was the first time someone in their little group had confirmed the scope of Lauren's betrayal without realizing it. Then I sat back and stared at the wall clock, because that is what you do when you can feel your life turning into a different shape, and you are trying to decide whether to fight the change or use it. I decided to use it, because I was tired of being the man who reacts, and I wanted to become the man who controls the pace. Around 9, my neighbor, an older man who liked to talk about lawn care as if it was diplomacy, knocked on my door with a face that said he had been drafted into a conversation he did not want. He did not step inside, he hovered on the porch like the porch was safer, and he asked awkwardly if everything was okay, because he had heard some voices the night before, and he had seen people leaving. The way he said it, I could tell he had been approached, not out of concern, but out of curiosity, because gossip always recruits first responders. I told him everything was fine, because the truth is I did not want him as a witness yet, not when the story was still shifting, and I did not want to contaminate the timeline with my own anger. But I asked him, gently, whether he had noticed any cars parked oddly, any unfamiliar vehicles that had lingered, any photos taken from across the street, because I wanted to map the surveillance without sounding paranoid. He hesitated, then said he had seen a dark sedan earlier, sitting a little too long, and he said he assumed it was Uber, but now he was not so sure. He pointed vaguely toward the corner where the streetlights were weakest, and I thanked him. And after he left, I wrote down that detail, because even casual neighbor observations become valuable when someone tries to claim you imagined everything. Lauren returned close to 10, and she came in with the kind of cautious confidence people wear when they think they have already won. Her hair was neat, her makeup was too deliberate for someone who had supposedly spent the day thinking, and she held her phone in her hand like a shield. She did not ask about my day, she did not ask why the house was quiet, and she did not ask about the messages, because she already knew, and she did not want to have to answer. She walked straight to the kitchen and poured herself water, like she owned the air. I asked her, casually, how her appointments went, and she replied that they went fine, and then she added that she had spoken to someone who said I was spiraling, like she was reading from a script that had been handed to her. I nodded slowly, and I asked, still calm, why it mattered what someone else thought about my mental state if she believed she was making a rational decision to divorce me. She looked annoyed, because rational people do not need smear campaigns, and she knew I knew. She said she wanted a separation agreement quickly. She said she wanted the house listed, and she said she wanted a clean process. And she said it all in one breath, the way you do when you are trying to outrun questions. I asked what clean meant in a process where she invited her friends into my living room to announce my divorce like it was a game show, and her face flushed, not with shame, but with anger that I would remember clearly. Then she said something that was supposed to be an ending, that I had been checked out for years, and that I had pushed her to seek attention elsewhere, which was her favorite trick, turning her choices into my crimes. I let her talk because people reveal more when they feel safe performing, and Lauren always performed best when she believed she was in control. She said she had supported me. She said I had withheld affection. She said she had needed connection, and she kept the story vague, because vagueness is where liars hide. When she finally paused, waiting for me to argue, I did not argue. I asked one question, in a tone that sounded like curiosity rather than accusation, whether her friends' husbands knew she had been seeking connection with them. The question hit her like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was specific, and specific is what breaks fiction. She snapped that I was making things up, and she demanded to know who had told me that, which was the wrong response for an innocent person, because innocent people deny the claim, they do not demand the source like it is a leak in a ship. I told her no one had told me anything, and that I was simply asking why her friends were so eager to divorce me for her if their own husbands were uninvolved. She moved closer, her eyes sharp, and she said I was trying to manipulate her, which was an absurd thing to say to a man who had been sitting quietly with a notebook. I told her I was not manipulating her, I was documenting, and I tapped the edge of my paper ledger lightly, letting the sound speak for me. She glanced down despite herself, and I watched her pupils tighten, because people fear paper when paper becomes a mirror. She asked what that was, and I said it was a timeline, and then I said it was the kind of thing a person makes when they stop trusting words. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle, and she said I was being dramatic, and I nodded, because the funniest part of betrayal is how often the betrayer calls the betrayed dramatic for noticing. Then she changed tactics, moving from contempt to concern, and she asked if I was okay, in that fake soft voice that suggests you might need help, which is the sound people make when they are laying the groundwork for the unstable narrative. I smiled at her, small and polite, and I told her I was fine, and that I was sleeping well, and that I was working, and that I had no intention of making scenes, and I said it all as if I were giving a status update to a supervisor. The more calm I stayed, the more she looked like the unstable one, and she could feel it, which made her mouth tighten again. She tried one more push, telling me that Grayson would reach out again, telling me I should cooperate, telling me that if I did not, she would take steps. I asked what steps, and she said legal steps, and I nodded again, because legal steps are not scary when you have documentation and you are not lying. She waited for fear, but I did not give her fear, and she hated that more than any insult. She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door, which was the closest she came to honesty all night, because slamming doors is what people do when they cannot control a conversation. I stayed in the kitchen and opened my phone again, and I did something that felt almost petty, but in truth, it was just practical. I checked the shared calendar, the one we used for household commitments, and I scrolled back through the past month, looking for blocks that had been added and deleted, the way you look for footprints in sand after a tide. I noticed something small that became huge the longer I stared at it. A repeating, volunteer planning event on Thursday nights that had been on the calendar for weeks, then recently renamed, then deleted. Lauren had told me those nights were about charity work with her friends, and she had used that line so often it sounded rehearsed, which meant it probably was. I took a screenshot of the week view where the event used to sit, because even absence can be evidence when absence follows a pattern. Then I opened my photo app and checked the shared cloud album we both had access to, not to snoop through her private messages, because I did not need that level of intimacy anymore, but to check metadata on the few photos she had added recently, the harmless-looking shots of food, a glass of wine, a generic interior wall with framed art. One of the images had a date stamp that did not match her story, and the location tag, the tiny suggestion of where the phone had been, placed her nowhere near the charity address she had named before. It placed her in a neighborhood near Evan's side of town. My stomach tightened again, not with jealousy, because jealousy is for men who still think love is the main issue, but with clarity, because clarity is what arrives when the puzzle pieces stop looking like coincidence. I saved the metadata screen as well, and I added it to the folder with the boring name, and I wrote the date and location on paper, because paper makes digital facts feel real. In the bedroom, Lauren's door opened and closed again, softer this time, and I heard her moving around, the sound of drawers, the sound of a suitcase zipper, the sound of a person preparing to leave before the house becomes a courtroom. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from a number I did recognize, Melissa's, and it was short, almost polite, asking if we could talk privately tomorrow because she needed to clear something up. I stared at the message for a long moment, and I could almost see Melissa's face as she typed it, the fear behind the politeness, the dread of being pulled into the light. I replied with one sentence, calm and neutral, telling her we could talk and giving a time and a place that was public enough to keep everyone honest. Then I turned my phone face down again, looked at my notes, and realized the night had given me two things I needed more than revenge: a crack in their unified front, and a witness who was finally scared enough to tell the truth. And if Melissa wanted to clear something up, it meant Lauren's friends were starting to realize that when one liar falls, the rest get dragged down by the same rope. The next morning arrived with the kind of false cleanliness that makes you want to trust it, like fresh snow covering a yard full of broken glass, and I refused to let the brightness trick me into thinking anything had improved. Lauren was gone when I woke up, which was convenient for her and useful for me, because people who vanish early are either running from accountability or racing toward a new script. I found her side of the closet oddly thinned, not empty, but curated, as if she had packed for an image rather than a life, and that told me she planned to be seen somewhere, not just to sleep somewhere. I did not call her, because I was done chasing a person who treated my concern like a weakness, and I was done giving her the satisfaction of hearing urgency in my voice. I showered, dressed, and moved through my house as if I were an investigator in someone else's case, touching nothing without noticing it, scanning surfaces for what had shifted, and forcing myself to stay slow because speed is what you use when you want to outrun your own thoughts. On the kitchen table, my notes sat where I had left them, patient and unblinking, and the folder on my phone remained named something dull enough to survive any accidental glance. I checked the time again, then checked the cafe address I had sent to Melissa, and I left the house 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I needed to arrive first, to pick a seat with sightlines and exits, and to avoid walking in like a man who had been summoned. The cafe was one of those places that pretends to be cozy while quietly charging you rent for a chair, all exposed brick and soft lighting and music chosen to keep people talking without listening to themselves. I picked a table near the window where the street reflected behind anyone who sat across from me, and I ordered coffee I did not want, because having something in your hands makes you look less like you are waiting to be hit. Then I sat and watched people come and go, noticing how often a man's eyes go to a door when he is worried about being seen, and how often a woman checks her phone when she is rehearsing what she plans to say. I told myself I was not here to beg for truth, because truth is not something you beg for. It is something you make unavoidable. Melissa arrived 5 minutes late, which was fitting, because women like her always believe being late gives them control, as if the other person's time is a negotiable asset. She wore sunglasses indoors for a moment, not because the light was strong, but because she wanted a barrier between her face and my calm. When she finally slid into the seat, she did not smile, she did not pretend this was friendly, and she did not ask how I was, because that question would have made her complicit in my humanity. She started with what she thought was a safe opening, telling me she wanted to clear things up because rumors were getting out of hand, and she said it like she was the responsible adult in a room full of children, which would have been almost funny if it were not about my marriage being turned into entertainment. I asked her what rumor she meant, and I kept my voice even, because a steady tone forces the other person to supply the drama themselves. Her mouth tightened, and she glanced toward the counter, toward the door, toward the window, as if the cafe might suddenly become a courtroom with a jury seated in the pastry case. She said Lauren was spiraling, and then she corrected herself, saying Lauren was stressed, and I noticed the slip, because stress is what you claim when you want sympathy, while spiraling is what you claim when you want someone discredited. I asked Melissa, simply, whether she believed Lauren was stressed, or whether she needed Lauren to sound unstable so everyone could justify what they were doing. Melissa flinched at that, not because I had accused her of a crime, but because I had named the mechanism. She leaned forward and lowered her voice, and she finally said the part she had come to say, that this had gone too far, and that she had not expected Lauren to start involving everyone. I did not interrupt, because people reveal more when you let them complain, and Melissa was the kind of woman who mistook confession for venting. She told me the night at my house had been supposed to be simple, a united front, a push to get me to sign something quickly, and she said it as if pressuring a spouse into signatures was the same as asking someone to help you move a couch. She added that Lauren had told them I would fold because I was conflict avoidant, and the fact that they had analyzed my personality together made my skin crawl in a very specific way, the way you feel when you realize your life has been discussed in rooms you were never allowed into. I asked Melissa what Lauren promised them in return, because nobody shows up to smirk at another woman's marriage for free, and Melissa's eyes widened as if she had not expected me to understand basic human greed. She said Lauren had promised that no one would get hurt, and then she laughed under her breath like she hated herself for repeating it, because a promise like that is always a lie, and everyone knows it. She said Lauren had insisted it was only a divorce, that it was better for everyone, that it would reset things, and when she said reset, Her voice sharpened, because reset is what people say when they want consequences erased. I told her to stop circling and tell me the actual problem, and for a second she looked like she might stand up and walk out, because truth always feels like a trap to the person carrying it. Then she finally said it, not in a dramatic confession, but in a tired, bitter exhale that Lauren had been sleeping with more than one of their husbands, and that it had not been a single mistake, but a pattern, and that pattern had started months ago. I did not react outwardly, because reaction is what they would later describe as instability. But inside my chest, something cold settled. Not heartbreak, but confirmation, because there is a difference between suspecting betrayal and hearing a timeline attached to names. Melissa would not give me the names at first, so I asked questions that forced her into specificity without making it a negotiation. I asked how they arranged the meetings, where they met, what cover stories were used, and which wives knew and pretended not to, because complicity is always uneven. Melissa tried to keep it vague, but vagueness is a luxury you lose when someone has already targeted you. She said the first contact happened at their volunteer committee, the group they used as moral camouflage, and she said Lauren and one husband started lingering after meetings while everyone cleaned up. She said the cover story was always practical, always believable, always something no one questions, like dropping off supplies, reviewing notes, planning fundraisers, because nothing gives an affair protection like a cause that makes people feel guilty for doubting it. I asked which husband, and she hesitated, then said his first name, then quickly said it did not matter, and that was when I knew it mattered. I made her repeat it, calmly, and I wrote it down on paper, not in my phone, because phones are easy to twist later, but paper with ink feels like a commitment to reality. She named him, then she named a second one, and she said that second one was the real reason the wives were panicking now, because his position carried risk, not legal risk, but social and professional risk, the kind that makes an entire community freeze you out. She admitted they had all known pieces of it, that they had all heard whispers, that they had all seen little things they chose not to interpret, because interpreting would have forced action, and action would have forced conflict. I asked her why she was telling me this now, and her face hardened in a way that told me the answer would not be noble. She said Lauren had started turning on them, blaming them, suggesting Melissa had encouraged the behavior, suggesting the husbands were aggressors, suggesting the wives were jealous and abusive, and Melissa said those words like they tasted rotten. She said Lauren had begun floating the idea that if any of them tried to expose her, she would expose them first, not with proof, but with stories, the kind of stories that stick even when they are false. Melissa said she could tolerate being embarrassed, but she would not tolerate being rewritten as a villain in Lauren's narrative, and she said it with a kind of selfish honesty I could respect more than fake remorse. That was when I understood the shape of Lauren's strategy, because it was not only cheating, it was control through preemptive storytelling, and the divorce demand in my living room was only the opening scene. Lauren wanted me isolated, labeled unstable, and pushed into a reactive outburst so that any future evidence I produced could be dismissed as a man losing his mind, and she had chosen her audience carefully, women who valued image more than integrity, and husbands who valued comfort more than truth. It was a neat little machine, and it would have worked on a man who still believed love was the only weapon in the room. I asked Melissa what proof existed, and she shook her head quickly, saying she did not have screenshots, and I could almost hear her internal lawyer screaming at her not to confess to possessing anything. I told her I did not need her to hack phones or steal messages, and I said it plainly, so she could not later claim I asked for something illegal. I asked what household-level facts she could confirm without compromising herself, and that phrasing changed her posture, because it made it sound like a civic duty rather than betrayal. She said she had seen Lauren arrive late to a dinner with a particular husband's jacket draped over her shoulders, and she said she had once overheard a call where Lauren used a nickname she only used when she was trying to sound intimate. She said she had watched Lauren delete a photo from the cloud album while insisting she never took it, and she admitted she knew which restaurant they used because Lauren loved places with low light and loud music where no one hears the details of a conversation. I told Melissa that if she wanted this to end cleanly for herself, she needed to give me one concrete, verifiable detail I could later corroborate without her. I asked for a date, a place, a time window, anything that would intersect with objective records like receipts or posted event photos, and her eyes flicked down to her purse as if it contained a gun. Then she pulled out her phone, hesitated again, and turned the screen slightly toward me, not handing it over, but showing me something she had saved because she could not stop herself. It was a screenshot of a public story, the kind people post and forget, with Lauren in the background at a bar table and a man's hand resting on the back of her chair in a way that was not friendly. The screenshot had a date stamp, and it had a location tag, and it was enough to build a timeline if I was patient. I did not ask to take her phone. I did not ask her to forward anything, and I did not do anything that could later be described as coercion. I simply asked her to text the screenshot to a neutral email address I dictated, an address that belonged to me alone, and I watched her do it with shaking fingers. When the email arrived, I thanked her without warmth, because gratitude is not the point here, and I asked her one last thing, whether the wives had plans to meet again soon. Melissa said yes, that they had a committee meeting scheduled at a community center in 2 days, and she said Lauren would be there because Lauren liked to control rooms where people could not leave easily without looking guilty. I finished my coffee, stood up, and told Melissa she had just bought herself a chance at being a person again, but that she should not confuse that chance with forgiveness. She looked like she wanted to argue, like she wanted me to reassure her, and I refused, because reassurance is what keeps cowards comfortable. I left the cafe without looking back, walked to my car, and sat with my hands on the wheel for a full minute, breathing slowly, letting the cold clarity settle into place. Back home, I opened my evidence folder, saved the emailed screenshot, and wrote a new line on my paper ledger: date, location tag, public story capture, and witness source noted as voluntary. Then I opened the shared cloud album again, not to spy, but to see whether anything had changed since last night, and I noticed a small deletion, one missing photo slot that used to be there. The kind of small, nervous cleanup a guilty person does when they sense attention. I took a screenshot of the album metadata showing the gap, because gaps become meaningful when someone later claims nothing was removed. Finally, I printed the public story screenshot and signed the back with the date I received it, because I wanted a physical chain, something that felt boring and undeniable. I had started this week as a husband being mocked in his own living room, and now, without raising my voice, I had turned one of their smirking friends into a frightened courier of truth. The machine they built depended on my silence and my shame, and they had mistaken my calm for surrender, which is the kind of mistake you only make once. I looked at the calendar again, saw the upcoming committee meeting circled on nothing but my own mind, and I realized the next 2 days were not about confronting Lauren, because private confrontations were useless now. The next 2 days were about building a clean, lawful record that could survive a room full of people who were finally going to understand what I had meant when I asked, politely, whether any of them cared she had been seeing their husbands. The 2 days before the committee meeting felt like a slow tightening around my ribs, not because I was anxious about what Lauren might do, but because I was learning how many ordinary moments can be weaponized when a person decides your life is a stage and your dignity is a prop. I kept my routine intact on purpose, because nothing ruins a clean record faster than a man who suddenly changes his habits and gives everyone a reason to claim he is unraveling. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at the right times. And I spoke to people the way I always had, while my phone and my paper ledger became the only places where the truth was allowed to live without interruption. Lauren did not call, which was its own kind of message, and she did not need to call because she was surrounded by women who would do the emotional labor for her. Their messages arrived in waves, alternating between fake concern and poorly disguised threats, and each one carried the same scent, the same idea that if I stayed quiet, they would let me keep a smaller version of my life. One friend suggested we all meet for coffee to talk like adults, which is code for cornering you in public where you cannot raise your voice without looking dangerous, and another wrote that Lauren was going through a lot and that I should stop being petty. I saved the messages, not because they were evidence of cheating, but because they were evidence of a coordinated narrative, and narrative is what courts and communities swallow when they are too lazy to look at dates. At home, the atmosphere was wrong in the smallest ways, like a picture frame shifted a half-inch, or a drawer not closed all the way, and I had to keep myself from interpreting every imperfection as a confession. I was not going to become the kind of man who walks through his own house like a burglar, because that is how paranoia becomes performance, and performance becomes their proof. Instead, I focused on what I could verify without stepping over any line, which meant I watched for public signals and household-level contradictions that Lauren herself could not argue without lying twice. The shared cloud album was the first place I looked each morning, not to stalk, but to see whether the pattern of deletions continued, because people who are cleaning up will keep cleaning up until they either feel safe again or get caught. The gap I had screenshotted stayed, and two more appeared by the second day, which told me Lauren had either panicked or been advised, and I was willing to bet her friends had told her to lock things down, without understanding that deletion is not erasure, it is a behavior, and behavior is a timeline. I took a new screenshot of the album screen showing the missing slots, then I printed it and placed it behind the first printout, because stacking evidence physically has a psychological effect on me that scrolling never will. I wrote a line under it in my ledger, and I did it slowly, like I was signing a receipt at a counter that might matter later. The second thread came from the account we shared for household expenses, because Lauren had never been disciplined about separating her life from mine, and she had always assumed I would not notice the bleed. A notification arrived about a small charge from a boutique hotel cafe across town, not an outrageous amount, just enough to be plausible as a random coffee, but the timestamp landed in a window where she had claimed she was home with the girls. I did not call the bank, and I did not argue with the notification like a desperate man pleading with a machine, because I did not need to, since the alert itself was a fact that would exist whether Lauren liked it or not. I screenshotted it, then I opened my calendar and wrote down the time window on paper, because paper does not refresh, does not vanish, and does not offer me a false sense of control. By the afternoon of the second day, I had a tight sequence of small truths, none of them dramatic on their own. But together, they formed the kind of pattern that makes a liar run out of oxygen. I also had something else, something more useful than proof, which was the realization that Lauren did not only cheat, she recruited, not always with intention, but with the instinct of someone who needs an audience to validate her choices. The committee meeting was perfect for her because it looked virtuous on the surface, and it created a social penalty for anyone who questioned her, because who wants to be the person doubting a woman doing good in a community space? That meant my approach had to be surgical, not loud, and it had to land like a neutral fact, because neutral facts do not trigger defensive storytelling in the same way accusations do. The evening before the meeting, Lauren finally came home, and she did it with the casual swagger of someone who believes she owns the emotional weather in the room. She walked in with a bag of takeout and a bright smile that did not reach her eyes, and she acted like the last few days had been an inconvenient pause, not a fracture. She asked how my day was, then she asked if I had calmed down, and the phrasing made it clear she was already rehearsing a version of me that she could sell later. I told her my day had been productive because I had learned that short, boring answers are a form of self-defense, and I watched her face twitch when she realized I was not giving her a hook. She moved through the kitchen and started talking about tomorrow's meeting like it was a normal obligation, like it was not the place she planned to keep spinning her life into something flattering. She said the committee needed her because things were falling apart, and she said it with the same tone she used when she wanted me to feel guilty for not supporting her. I asked her, calmly, whether she was going to the meeting as herself or as someone else, because I had grown tired of watching her change masks depending on the room. She stiffened, then laughed, then asked what that was supposed to mean, and I could feel her testing which response would make me look worse later. I did not answer with anger. I answered with boredom, because boredom is kryptonite to people who live on attention. Lauren leaned on the counter and told me her friends were worried about me, and she said it like a threat wrapped in concern, like an officer telling you he is only pulling you over for your safety. She said they thought I was obsessing, and she said it slowly, watching for a reaction, and I smiled just enough to show I heard the manipulation. I told her obsession is when you imagine things without facts, and I told her I was collecting facts, which is a different hobby entirely. She asked what facts, and I said nothing, because I did not negotiate with someone who had already chosen to make me the villain. She threw her hands up, called me exhausting, and walked out of the kitchen, and the way she left was important, because she did not leave like someone who felt guilty. She left like someone who felt entitled to a cleaner ending. That night I slept lightly, not because I feared violence, but because I had learned how quickly Lauren could manufacture chaos if she sensed she was losing control. In the early hours, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number, and I let it ring out, because men who answer at that hour are men who get baited into panicked conversations. A minute later, a text arrived from the same number saying I should stop harassing people, and that word, harassing, sat there like a planted flag, as if someone was laying the groundwork for the story they wanted to tell. I saved the screenshot, wrote the time down, and went back to sleep, because nothing infuriates a manipulator like a target who refuses to dance. The next day, I arrived at the community center 10 minutes early, not to lurk, but to become part of the environment, because the man who arrives early looks responsible, while the man who bursts in looks unstable. The center smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner, and the fluorescent lights flattened everyone into the same tired color, which I appreciated because glamour thrives in shadows. The committee room was set up with folding tables, a tray of cookies no one would eat, and a sign-in sheet that looked like it had been printed from a template that had survived a decade of neglect. I greeted the coordinator, a woman named Nora who spoke in the calm voice of someone who has mediated too many petty conflicts, and I told her I was here because I had a concern that touched the integrity of the group's work. I made sure my voice was polite, because the person you speak to first is often the person who will later describe your tone to everyone else. Lauren arrived with two of her friends, laughing too loudly for a room that was still empty, and she stopped when she saw me, not in surprise, but in annoyance, like I had violated her script by showing up prepared. Her friends exchanged quick looks, the kind that says, "Be ready, he might act out," and I almost admired their discipline, because it takes practice to coordinate fear. Lauren walked over and asked what I was doing here, and she said it as if the room belonged to her. I told her I was attending a public committee meeting in a public building, and that I had a right to be present as a community member, which was true enough to disarm her without starting a fight. The room filled gradually with volunteers, a few spouses, and one man who looked like he had been dragged here by guilt rather than interest. Lauren's friends moved into seats that formed a loose semicircle around her, a protective shape that made them feel powerful, and I chose a seat on the edge, not to hide, but to avoid the visual of me sitting directly across like an opponent in a duel. Nora opened the meeting with routine announcements, and Lauren performed attention, nodding at the right times, smiling when the group mentioned donations, and I watched her do it with the practiced ease of someone who has never felt the sting of shame when she should. The agenda moved forward, and then Nora asked if anyone had concerns or new business, and the room went quiet in that polite way people get when they sense discomfort coming. I raised my hand, not dramatically, just enough to signal I was about to speak like an adult. Nora acknowledged me, and I stood slowly, because speed looks emotional. I said I wanted to keep this brief, and I said my concern was about honesty and transparency, because those values mattered to any group claiming to serve the community. I said there had been confusion about whether certain committee activities had occurred at all, and whether certain people had used committee obligations as cover for unrelated personal decisions. I did not say cheating. I did not say affair. I did not say husband or wife, because labeling makes the room choose sides before they see evidence. I said I had a public screenshot, date stamped, location tagged, showing Lauren at a venue during a time she had represented as committee work. And I said I also had a household financial alert, showing a purchase at a location inconsistent with her stated timeline. Lauren's face tightened first, then she tried to smile, and I watched her decide whether to laugh it off or to attack me, and she chose attack because she always had. She said I was being vindictive, and she said I was trying to embarrass her, and she said it loudly enough that the room would remember her tone, not my words. I let her speak, because I wanted everyone to see who controlled themselves and who did not. When she finished, I asked Nora calmly if the committee preferred facts or feelings, and I asked it like a genuine question, because Nora's answer would set the room's rules. Nora, to her credit, said if there was documentation relevant to the committee's integrity, it should be reviewed in an orderly way, and she asked me to provide it without disrupting the meeting. I nodded, as if we were discussing a misfiled receipt, and I walked forward and placed one printed page in front of Nora, not a binder, not a spectacle, just a single page with a screenshot and a date, plus a short note about the timestamp on the bank alert. I did not hand it to Lauren because I had no intention of giving her the chance to snatch it and declare it fake. I watched Nora read, and I watched the room lean forward without realizing they were doing it, because humans are drawn to paper like it is a magnet for truth. Lauren tried to speak again, but Nora held up a hand, and for the first time in the room, Lauren had to wait. That moment was small, almost invisible, but it was the first crack in her control, because she was not used to being paused by someone who did not fear her. Nora asked Lauren if she could account for the discrepancy, and Lauren's eyes flicked around the room as she searched for an ally to rescue her. One of her friends started to speak, then stopped, because friends who smirk in private become quiet when the room's temperature shifts. Lauren said she must have been mistaken about the date, and she said the bank alert could be anything, and she said someone could have tagged her without her consent, and each explanation contradicted the one before it. I did not argue, and I did not gloat, because I did not need to. The room was doing the math for me. Nora said she would need to verify whether committee resources had been misrepresented, and she said she would note the concern in the minutes and follow up, and that phrase, "note it in the minutes," hit Lauren harder than any insult could have. Lauren's jaw clenched and her cheeks flushed, and for the first time she looked less like a queen and more like a person trapped in her own story. When the meeting ended, people stood in clusters and pretended to talk about volunteer schedules, while their eyes stayed on Lauren like she was a live wire. Lauren rushed toward me with her friends at her back, and she hissed that I had no idea what I had started, and she said it like a warning meant to scare me back into silence. I told her, quietly, that I knew exactly what I had started, and that it was not a fight, it was a record. She looked like she wanted to slap me with words, but she could not, because we were still in the building, still under fluorescent lights, still in public, and she needed to preserve the version of herself that did not look guilty. I left the community center with my hands steady and my mind clear, because I had achieved what I needed without crossing any line, and I had watched Lauren fail to explain a simple discrepancy without spinning a new lie. But as I walked to my car, my phone vibrated again, and the screen filled with missed calls and messages from unknown numbers, and I knew the next phase had begun, because the moment a manipulator loses control of one room, they try to control the next one through noise. I sat in the driver's seat, opened my evidence folder, saved screenshots of the flood of messages with their timestamps, and I realized Lauren was not just angry now. She was scared, and scared people do not stop. They escalate, which meant my next move had to land before her new story could harden into gospel. I stayed in the driver's seat longer than I needed to, not because I was stunned, but because I could feel the shape of what Lauren was trying to build, and I wanted to understand the mechanics before I touched anything. The first missed calls were from numbers I did not recognize, which meant someone had either shared my contact information or had encouraged people to check on me, and both were the same move dressed in different clothes. The messages were louder than the calls, because messages can be forwarded, screenshotted, and repackaged as proof of whatever story they want to sell. One said I should stop showing up to intimidate women. Another warned me that I was going to lose everything if I did not back off. And a third, the most revealing, told me to stop dragging innocent people into my marriage. The word innocent was always a tell, because nobody says it unless guilt is in the room. I saved everything with the same calm rhythm I used at work when I was filing a claim, because panic makes you sloppy, and sloppy is the only gift a liar ever asks for. Then I drove home slowly, not because I was trying to cool down, but because I was thinking through who had the most to lose if Lauren's harmless nights stopped being harmless. The obvious answer was me, but the flood of messages hinted at something wider, something communal, something that depended on multiple people keeping their mouths shut at the same time. Lauren had always been good at turning private mess into group entertainment, and if her friends were this invested, then they were not just spectators anymore. By the time I got home, my phone was vibrating every few minutes, as if the device itself was trying to shake free from my hand. I plugged it in on the kitchen counter, opened my paper ledger beside it, and wrote a simple line with the date and the time. Harassment wave begins after committee minutes mention evidence. It was not a dramatic sentence, but it was the kind of sentence that becomes a spine later, because it connects cause and effect without emotion. I made a second line under it, because my instincts had sharpened into something almost clinical. Probable coordination, not spontaneous outrage. That was the real story here, not that people were mad, but that people had been activated on schedule. Lauren did not come home right away, which told me she was either hiding from the immediate aftermath or performing damage control in another room, where she could still be the hero. I cleaned the kitchen with deliberate care, because there is something grounding about normal tasks when your life starts turning into a public referendum. I kept one ear open for the door, and when it finally opened, it was not Lauren alone. She brought two of her friends with her, like bodyguards or witnesses, depending on how the night went. They walked into my house with the confidence of people who think a moral majority grants them property rights, and I watched their eyes scan the room, looking for evidence that I was unstable, messy, dangerous, anything that could justify what they were about to do. Lauren moved first, setting her purse down like she owned the counter. Then she gave me a tired look that was meant to signal victimhood. One friend, the tall one with the polished hair and the practiced smile, asked if we could all talk calmly, and I almost laughed at the choreography. The other friend, shorter and sharper, kept her arms crossed like a judge waiting for a confession. Lauren said she was worried about me, that I had embarrassed her, and that my obsession was getting out of hand. She said it with enough softness to sound caring, and enough precision to sound rehearsed, as if she had practiced the sentence in a mirror until it felt clean. I let her speak, because the more someone talks when they think they are in control, the more they reveal what they are hiding. When she finished, I asked a simple question, and I asked it the same way I had asked Nora in that committee room. Do you want to discuss facts, or do you want to discuss feelings? The tall friend blinked, and the short friend's mouth tightened, because that question forces a choice, and liars hate choices. Lauren said facts, then immediately tried to pivot into feelings by describing how scared she was, how humiliated she felt, how her friends were concerned. I nodded once, then asked her if she wanted to put her statements in writing, because written statements are where stories die. Lauren's face changed, just a flicker, but I saw it, because I had been watching her for years. She asked what I meant, and I told her it was simple, that if she was claiming I had harassed or intimidated anyone, then she should write it down with dates and times, and we could take it to mediation like adults. The tall friend started to speak, but Lauren held up a hand, which told me she was not here for resolution. She was here for leverage. Lauren said she did not need to put anything in writing because everyone already knew how I was acting, and that line was the real weapon, because it meant she was building consensus, not truth. That was when I decided to stop treating this like a marriage problem and start treating it like a group fraud. I asked Lauren's friends a question I had not planned to ask out loud, not yet, but their presence made it necessary. I asked whether their husbands knew they were sitting in my kitchen defending a woman who had been spending harmless nights with other people's spouses. The air shifted instantly, and the short friend's eyes widened before she could control them. The tall friend laughed too fast, too loud, and said that was disgusting, that I was trying to smear Lauren, and that I should be ashamed. Lauren stared at me like she wanted to cut my tongue out with her stare, because she knew I was not guessing, I was aiming. I did not accuse them of anything specific, because specificity is where defamation claims live, and I was not interested in giving Lauren a new arena. Instead, I asked Lauren one more question, calmly, and I made sure everyone heard the words clearly. Do any of your friends in this room want to swear right now that you have never crossed a line with their husbands? Lauren did not answer, and her silence was so loud it felt like a siren. The tall friend said this was insane and stormed toward the door, and the short friend followed her, but she kept looking back at Lauren like she was seeing a stranger. Lauren stayed, and the moment the door shut, she changed tone, because witnesses were gone and the mask could loosen. She told me I had no right to bring her friends into it, that I was trying to destroy her life, and that I would regret it. I told her I was not bringing her friends into anything, because she was the one who had brought them into my house, and she was the one who had invited strangers to call and threaten me. She said she did not control what people did, and I said she controlled the story, which is what matters. Then she made a mistake, the kind of mistake people make when they are angry and confident at the same time. She said, very coldly, that everyone was tired of me acting superior, and she said that I had been judging her for years, and that she deserved someone who made her feel alive. The word deserved always appears right before a confession, because entitlement is the doorway guilt walks through. She left not long after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle a frame in the hallway, and I did not chase her, because chasing is what she wanted. I waited until the house was quiet again. Then I sat down and opened my phone, not to scroll through insults, but to look for patterns. The unknown numbers were not random. Several had area codes from the same region, and a few messages used similar phrasing, as if they had been copied and adjusted. One message mentioned the committee by name, which meant the caller knew about it quickly, which meant Lauren had been broadcasting the event in real time, framing it as harassment before anyone could frame it as accountability. I did what I always do when people try to drown me in noise, which is, I look for the one clean thread that can cut through it. I opened my contacts, found the number for Nora from the community center, and drafted a short, polite message explaining that I had received a surge of threatening calls after the meeting, and that I wanted the committee to know in case any member experienced the same. I did not accuse Lauren of orchestrating it, and I did not ask Nora to take sides, because my goal was not to recruit allies, it was to anchor the timeline in neutral spaces. I sent the message, then I screenshotted the sent confirmation and wrote down the time in my ledger, because even my own actions needed to be recorded cleanly. The next morning, The workplace pressure arrived exactly the way I expected, not as an official email, but as a temperature change. People looked away a little faster, conversations stopped when I entered, and one colleague asked if everything was okay at home, in a voice that was too careful. Lauren had friends everywhere, or at least she had people who enjoyed gossip enough to act like they were friends. I did not correct anyone, because correcting people in public makes you look defensive, and defensiveness is the clay rumor is molded from. Instead, I did my work with extra precision, and I let the day unfold long enough for someone to slip and show me the source. The slip came at lunch, when a junior co-worker I barely knew said, with a nervous half-smile, that he had seen a post about a man harassing volunteers. He said he did not believe it, but he asked anyway, because curiosity is stronger than loyalty in most offices. I asked where he had seen it, and he hesitated, then admitted it was in a local community group online, one of those pages where people share lost pets and then quietly ruin each other's reputations. I asked him calmly to show me the post, and he did, holding his phone like a priest offering a confession. The post did not name me, but it described the meeting, described the angry husband, and included a cropped photo of the room from an angle that could only have been taken by someone sitting behind Lauren. I thanked him, went back to my desk, and saved the public post permalink with the date stamp visible, because that was not just gossip, it was coordination, and coordination has consequences when it becomes documented. Then I opened the comments and read them slowly, looking for names I recognized, and I saw Lauren's tall friend in there, typing like a prosecutor, calling for people to protect women from controlling men. I did not respond, because responding would feed the fire. But I saved the screenshots, because the more they moralized, the more they pinned their own lie to the wall. That afternoon, I received a notification from our shared account again, another small charge, another normal purchase, this time at a florist, and the irony almost made me smile. Lauren had always bought flowers after she caused damage, as if beauty could erase behavior. I screenshotted the merchant alert, then I checked the date and time, then I compared it against her claim that she was running errands for the committee. I did not need to prove she was lying in one dramatic reveal. I only needed to create a chain of small contradictions so tight she could not move without tearing it. When I got home, there was a new problem waiting, and it was sitting right in my driveway like a deliberate insult. A car I did not recognize was parked behind mine, close enough to make leaving awkward, not illegal, just invasive. I stood there for a moment, looking at it, and I realized this was the next escalation, the shift from digital noise to physical presence. My phone buzzed, and a message appeared from an unknown number that said simply, "Stop, or we come to your job next." I stared at the words, then I saved the screenshot, because threats are evidence when they are documented, and documentation was my only real weapon. I walked inside, locked the door, and opened my ledger again, because fear becomes manageable when it becomes written. I wrote the time, I wrote the message, and I wrote one more line beneath it, the line that mattered most. Next step is not confrontation. Next step is exposure with receipts. Then I heard a soft knock at the front door, not aggressive, not urgent, the kind of knock that wants me to open it so they can claim they were being polite. I did not move toward it, and I did not speak, and I let the knock repeat once more, slower, as if the person outside was savoring the power of my silence. When my phone buzzed again, a new message arrived, and the sender finally used a name I recognized, which meant the mask was slipping, and the real enemy had decided to step out of the crowd. I kept my back against the hallway wall and watched the front door like it had become a stage where the next lie would try to perform itself into truth, and I refused to be the kind of man who helped his own enemies rehearse. The knock came again, softer this time, and then stopped, as if the person outside had decided silence might bait me better than pressure. My phone buzzed once more, and the message preview showed a familiar first name that punched straight through the fog of anonymity, because suddenly this was not a crowd anymore. It was a person standing close enough to touch my porch. I did not open the message yet, because I wanted the doorbell camera to do what it was built to do, and I wanted the evidence to exist before my emotions could corrupt my judgment. I opened the camera feed on my phone, and the image stabilized into a wide-angle frame of my front step, the street, and the edge of my driveway, which still held that unfamiliar car like a parked threat. A man stood on the porch with his hands visible, not aggressive, not relaxed either, the posture of someone trying to look harmless while carrying something heavy inside his chest. He was not one of Lauren's two friends, and he was not someone I recognized from our immediate circle, but there was something familiar about the shape of his confidence, like I had seen him on someone else's social media, smiling in group photos, always placed too close. He glanced toward the driveway, then back to my door, then down at his phone, and I watched him hesitate, as if he was weighing whether to leave before I could capture his face clearly. I took a still frame from the doorbell feed with the timestamp visible. Then I saved it. Then I photographed my own screen with the timestamp again, because redundancy is not paranoia when people are actively rewriting your reality. I opened the message, and the name at the top was Nora, the facilitator from the community center, which made my pulse slow down a fraction, because at least this was not a stranger trying to corner me. Nora's message was short and careful, and it said she had received reports that someone had been using the committee meeting to stir online drama, and she asked whether I felt unsafe, because if so, she could document that the committee did not condone harassment. The message did not accuse anyone, but it held a key detail, and that detail was the word reports, plural, which told me others had reached out, which told me Lauren's story had not landed cleanly even with her own audience. I replied with the same restraint, confirming I had received threats and that an unknown vehicle had blocked my driveway, and I asked if any committee member could confirm in writing that evidence had been submitted and the meeting had ended without incident. I did not ask for favors, and I did not ask her to take my side. I asked for a neutral record, because neutral records are the opposite of smear. When I sent it, I saved the sent confirmation again, then wrote down the time in my ledger, then listened to the house, because the silence inside felt too small for the noise outside. The man on my porch knocked once more, and this time he spoke low enough that the microphone on the doorbell caught only fragments, but the tone was urgent, not threatening. I stayed still, then moved to the side window with the curtain pulled back a sliver, and I saw him more clearly in the streetlight spill. He was in his late 30s, well kept, the kind of man who always looked like he had a plan until the plan failed and he had no face left to wear. He held a small paper bag in one hand, and his other hand hovered near his phone, as if he was ready to record me if I exploded, which meant he had been trained by someone, coached by someone, or had coached himself with the same content that had been posted about me online. I decided to control the frame instead of letting him control it. I opened the door one notch with the chain still latched, keeping my body out of reach, keeping my voice flat, and keeping my eyes focused on the bag, not his face. He said my name like he already knew it well, and then he introduced himself as Darius, which didn't matter as much as what he added next, because he said he was married to Elise, and Elise was one of Lauren's closest friends. That sentence landed like a stone in my gut, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed that the rot was inside the group, not around it. Then he said he was sorry he was here, but he did not know where else to go, because he had just been told his wife was helping Lauren through a hard time, and he had found something in Elise's car that did not fit that story at all. I kept the chain latched and asked him to hold up the paper bag to the crack so I could see what he meant without letting him step inside. He lifted it slowly, and I saw a folded program booklet, the kind you get at a fundraiser or a gala, with the community center's logo on the front, except the date printed on it was for next week, not tonight. That detail mattered, because it meant something was scheduled, and it meant they were already moving toward a public stage, which meant Lauren's friends were not just gossiping, they were organizing. He said he had found it under Elise's passenger seat, along with a printed seating chart and a small envelope labeled with Lauren's handwriting. He said he did not open the envelope because he did not want to be the kind of man who broke into his own marriage like a thief. But he was here now because his restraint had not protected him. It had only protected Elise. I told him to step back from the door while I took a picture of him and the bag through the crack, and he complied without arguing, which told me he was not here to intimidate me. He was here because he was scared of what his wife had become. I snapped the photos, saved them, then asked him to read aloud the date on the program while the doorbell camera recorded, because a time-stamped audio clip of him stating a date would matter later when people claimed he had fabricated it. He read the date, and his voice cracked halfway through, then steadied, because shame always tries to show itself before anger does. Then I asked him the question that mattered most, the one that would decide whether he was useful or dangerous, and I asked it without softening the edges. Did Elise know he was here? He said no, and the way he said it told me he was ashamed of that too, because secrecy is a poison even when it's justified. I told him I would not let him in, not because I did not believe him, but because people were trying to bait me into something they could film, and I was done giving them opportunities. I told him to put the bag on my porch, step back to the walkway, and then leave. He hesitated, then did it, placing the bag down as carefully as if it contained glass. As he stepped back, he looked toward that unfamiliar car in my driveway and said, in a voice so quiet it felt like an admission, that the car belonged to Elise's cousin, and that cousin had been staying with them to help, which meant the blocking of my driveway had been intentional, and it meant Elise's household had become an extension of Lauren's campaign. I waited until Darius walked back down the steps and into the street. Then I watched him stand under the streetlight and type rapidly on his phone, like he was sending a message that would either trigger his own destruction or stop it. Before he could leave, the unfamiliar car's driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. Sharp posture, fast movements, the kind of person who has always been praised for taking charge. She marched toward my porch without looking at Darius, as if he was furniture, and I recognized her face from the community group comments, because she was the tall friend, the polished one, the one who used moral language like a weapon. She saw the chain on my door and smiled like she had been waiting for this. Then she raised her phone, camera aimed at the crack, and asked me loudly, for the record, why I was harassing women at night. Darius turned toward her, stunned, then furious, and he said Elise did not tell him she had sent her cousin here to block my car. The tall friend snapped her head toward him, and in that second her mask slipped, because she did not expect a husband to be present, and she did not expect him to speak. She told him to shut up and stop embarrassing Elise, and the word embarrassing was the tell again, because it was never about truth. It was always about image. I did not step outside, and I did not raise my voice, because I could feel the trap tightening around the idea of me as an aggressor. Instead, I held my phone up just enough for the doorbell camera to capture it, and I said, calmly, that I was recording for my own safety, and that no one had permission to block my driveway or threaten me. The tall friend moved closer, still filming, and she tried to reach toward the chain as if she could force the door wider, and Darius grabbed her wrist, not violently, not twisting, just stopping her, and even that small contact made her gasp theatrically, like she had been assaulted. She yanked her arm back and started shouting that she was being attacked, and I watched the performance ignite instantly because she needed witnesses. A porch light snapped on across the street, then another, and I felt the neighborhood's attention turn toward my front step like a spotlight. Darius stepped away from her, hands up, and he said he did not touch her aggressively, but his words were already losing to her volume. I kept my chain latched and stayed inside, which was the only move that protected me from being turned into a clip. I told Darius to leave, and I told the tall friend to remove the vehicle from my driveway, or I would call a tow company. Not the police, not an emergency number, just a tow, because I wanted the conflict to stay in the realm of property and record, not emotion and spectacle. She laughed and said I would not dare. Then she said Elise had already told everyone what kind of man I was, and hearing my wife's name on her lips in my doorway made something inside me go cold and precise. Darius looked at me through the crack, eyes pleading, and I could see that he understood now that his wife's friend group was not just messy, it was predatory. When the tall friend turned slightly, I saw the edge of a folded sheet sticking out of her jacket pocket, and I recognized the corner pattern immediately, because I had printed the community center's one-page meeting agenda for myself earlier that week. That meant someone had gotten a copy, and it meant they were using official-looking documents to make unofficial accusations. She noticed me looking, and she tucked it deeper like a dealer hiding a card. Then her phone rang, and she glanced at the screen and answered without hesitation, putting it on speaker the way people do when they want an audience. Elise's voice spilled out, breathy, controlled, and she asked what was taking so long, because she needed the receipt before midnight. That single word, spoken casually into the open air, rearranged the whole scene for me, because it confirmed that tonight was not a spontaneous confrontation. It was a timed operation. The tall friend froze for half a beat, then tried to turn the speaker off. But Darius heard it too, and the expression on his face changed from confusion to clarity so fast it looked like pain. He asked Elise what she meant, and Elise went silent, then asked why he was there, and her voice sharpened, because control was slipping. The tall friend started talking over the phone, trying to cover, trying to redirect, trying to reframe, and that messy scramble was the first real crack I had seen in their structure. I reached out carefully, unlatched the chain just enough to grab the paper bag from the porch without opening the door fully, then I pulled it inside and relocked everything. Through the doorbell camera, I watched the tall friend grab Darius's arm and try to drag him toward the unfamiliar car, as if she could physically remove the problem. He jerked away, and he did not hit her, but he pointed at the driveway and told her to move the car now. She stepped back, still filming, still trying to get a clip that would save her, but the neighborhood had already watched her block a man's driveway and accuse him loudly with no cause, and that kind of public overreach sticks. I carried the bag to the kitchen table like it was evidence in a case, because that is what it was now, and I photographed each item before I touched it further. The program, the seating chart, the envelope with Lauren's handwriting. I did not open the envelope yet, because the fact it existed mattered more than whatever it contained, and opening it would let them accuse me of tampering. I slid it into a clear sleeve, wrote the date and time on a label, and placed it in my drawer beside the ledger. Then I sat down, listened to the raised voices outside fade into car doors and engines, and I realized I had just been handed the first real map of Lauren's endgame. My phone buzzed again, and this time the message was from an unknown number, but the tone was different, not threatening, not performative, almost businesslike. It said they could make this go away if I stopped talking to facilitators and stopped mentioning committee minutes, and the word minutes was the smoking gun because it meant they were terrified of records, not rumors. I saved the message, then I opened my calendar, looked at next week's community center event listed in the program, and saw the public arena they were building toward with my own eyes. Whatever Lauren planned to do to me, she planned to do it in a room full of witnesses, with documents in hand, and with my reaction as the main prize. I sat there with the envelope in its sleeve, the program beside it, the seating chart like a blueprint of a trap, and I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the simplest truth of the night. Lauren was not just cheating, and she was not just humiliating me. She was coordinating a group, using other women's marriages as fuel, and trying to force a public divorce verdict before any legal process could touch her. And now, thanks to one husband who had finally followed his gut instead of his loyalty, I had proof that their next move had a date, a place, and a seat number with my name written into it. By morning, the street had gone back to pretending nothing happened, but my house felt like a file cabinet that had learned to breathe, because every surface now held a piece of the truth, and every quiet minute sounded like someone else's plan forming in the dark. I made coffee I did not want, watched the foam collapse, and opened my evidence drawer like a man checking a pulse, because the envelope with Lauren's handwriting still sat there in its clear sleeve, sealed, labeled, and stubbornly innocent-looking, even though it had already changed the entire geometry of my life. I did not open it, not yet, because the point was not curiosity, the point was control, and curiosity is how people like Lauren get you to touch the knife and then cry about fingerprints. Instead, I built the ledger into something that could survive daylight, which meant simple lines, clean timestamps, and proof that did not require anyone to trust my feelings. I printed the doorbell still frame with the porch timestamp, printed the unknown number's message where they tried to bargain me into silence, and printed Nora's neutral confirmation that reports had been filed, because neutrality is a weapon when your enemy runs on emotion and volume. Then I stapled the pages in chronological order, wrote the date on the back of each printout, and signed them like I was signing for a delivery I never ordered. The first call I made was not to a friend, and not to a lawyer either, because I knew how fast friend becomes mutual friend in a group like ours. I called the community center front desk, asked for the public schedule, and confirmed the event listed on the program without acting like it mattered, which was easy because clerks have heard every tone of panic, and mine was not going to entertain them. The woman on the phone confirmed the fundraiser night, confirmed the door's open time, and confirmed that seating assignments would be handled by a volunteer coordinator, not by guests, which told me Lauren's seating chart was either a fake meant to intimidate me or a real leak meant to corner me. Both options were useful, because either one proved intent. Then I called Darius back, not because I trusted him, but because he had already done the one thing that made him credible. He stepped into the blast radius and lost comfort immediately. He sounded wrecked, which meant he was human, and he confirmed Elise had not come home, which meant the friend group was circling her like an extraction team. He said he had received messages telling him to stop embarrassing his wife, and he said someone had threatened to post something about him if he kept talking, and I told him calmly that a threat is a confession when it arrives before an accusation. I asked him one thing, and only one thing, because a single ask is easier to fulfill under pressure. I asked him to write a short statement on paper, sign it, and take a photo of it with today's date visible in the frame, saying he found the program and envelope in Elise's car and brought them to my door. He hesitated, then agreed, because men like him hesitate when they realize truth has a process, and the process requires bravery. Around noon, my wife finally texted, and it was not remorse, it was management, because she asked why people were calling her, and she said I needed to stop creating drama, and she added that she and her friends were meeting later to talk like adults. I did not reply with anger, and I did not reply with explanations, because explanations are how liars gather your weak spots. I replied with one sentence that stayed inside the fence of civil reality, telling her I was aware of the fundraiser, I would be there, and I expected all communication about our marriage to be documented going forward. A minute later, she called, then called again, then sent a string of messages that tried 3 different identities in 10 minutes, moving from wounded wife to threatening strategist to sweet negotiator, like she was spinning through costumes to see which one would stick. That was when the first real twist clicked into place, because it stopped feeling like Lauren's betrayal and started feeling like a coordinated play, the kind that requires someone with experience in controlling rooms, not just controlling spouses. The tall friend's language from last night, the way she reached for my door chain like she owned the boundary, the way Elise's voice asked for the receipt before midnight, all of it pointed toward one person who understood leverage better than lust. It meant the affair angle was the spark, but the real engine was reputation, and whoever built this wanted to turn me into a warning example, not a victim. I spent the afternoon making my plan as boring as possible, because boring is unfilmable and unarguable. I put my prints into clear sleeves, labeled them, and packed them into a slim folder that looked like paperwork, not revenge. I drafted a one-page timeline with dates, places, and confirmation points, and I left out adjectives because adjectives are the playground of the dishonest. Then I did the one thing Lauren's group could not anticipate, because it did not fit the story they were writing about me. I prepared to say almost nothing in public, and to let silence and documents do the talking. By evening, as I locked my front door and checked the folder one last time, my phone lit up with a new message from a number I recognized this time, and the preview text told me the trap was already moving earlier than expected because someone had changed the venue details and wanted me to show up alone. I stared at the screen long enough to feel my pulse slow into something sharper, because now it was no longer about whether they were planning something. It was about whether I would walk into their room or make them walk into mine. By the time I reached the venue, the night had already been staged like a trial without a judge, because the lobby was crowded with familiar faces pretending to be strangers, and every smile looked practiced, as if they had rehearsed how to watch a man drown without getting wet. I did not scan the room for Lauren first, because predators love being noticed, so I found the volunteer coordinator instead and asked politely where the board secretary was sitting, since minutes would be recorded, and I wanted my statement entered cleanly. The coordinator blinked, confused by how calm I sounded, then pointed toward a long table where a woman sat with a laptop and a stack of printed agendas, and that was the moment I knew the room had a spine, because anything with a secretary has a record, and anything with a record can be forced to tell the truth. I walked over without urgency, placed my slim folder down, and asked for one line in the minutes. Evidence submitted for review, with my name attached, and no commentary added by anyone else. The secretary hesitated, then opened the folder as if it might bite, and I watched her eyes move across dates, timestamps, and the neutral confirmations that did not care about anyone's feelings. Behind me, chairs scraped, and I heard Lauren's friends go quiet in that specific way people go quiet when they realize a joke has an ending. Lauren started to speak, but the chair cut her off because the secretary had already typed, and typed words do not untype just because someone gets emotional. Then I did the final stunt, because endings need a clean click. I asked the secretary to project the live minutes for 30 seconds, nothing else, and when the screen showed the line, evidence received with the timestamp, I said exactly one sentence to the room, asking Lauren to confirm her cover story into the record. She tried and failed on the first date, because the receipts did not match, and the silence that followed was not mine to manage anymore. When the facilitator called for a recess and the chair announced an internal review, Lauren looked at me like I had stolen her oxygen, and I realized the justice was not a punch. It was the moment the room stopped protecting her.